Linda Rottenberg, who's CEO of a company called Endeavor, she's this incredible leader, but she says she didn't really become an inspiring leader until she started talking about her human side. In this case, it was her husband's battle with cancer. But I always tell people, if she exposed her vulnerability at the beginning, no one would have taken her serious as a leader. Hillary Clinton cries and it transforms her into a human. Elizabeth Dole cries at the beginning of her campaign and she's done, right? And so you want to establish your competence first. And once you establish your competence, it allows you to be generous.
Hello, and welcome to the Psychology Podcast. In each episode, we talk with inspiring scientists, thinkers, and other self-actualizing individuals who will give you a greater understanding of yourself, others, and the world we live in. We even hope to give you a glimpse into human possibility. On today's episode, we feature Columbia Business School professor Adam Galinsky, author of the book Inspire, The Universal Path for Leading Yourself and Others. In this episode, we discuss the universal characteristics of truly inspiring leaders and how we can all become more visionary leaders. We also discuss the importance of expanding the status pie and what Dr. Galinsky calls the leader amplification effect. This is an important discussion and very relevant to the world today. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. Adam Galinsky. Professor Dr. Adam Galinsky. So excited to have you on the Psychology Podcast.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Scott Kaufman. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. I've done this podcast 11 years. It's like about time we had you on the show. Yes. I've been a long time admirer of your work, as you know.
Ditto.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Your new book is called, how many books have you had?
It's my second book. So my first solo authored book, I had a co-authored book called Friend and Foe before.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I actually I really like that book. But your second book is called Inspire: The Universal Path for Leading Yourself and Others. Why did you write this one? Why are you like, okay, I need to do this. I need to go through the torture of writing a book.
Yeah, it's a great question. I describe in the acknowledgments of the book that this book really is my heart and soul. I love this book. It's really everything that there's a lot of personal stories, but there's also just like the core of my research and my identity. And over the last, since 2002, so, over 20 years, I've been teaching leadership to MBA students, all over the world. And, my classes just developed over time. And at some point I realized that my class told kind of a coherent story that I think would be just really helpful for people. And I think, one of the core ideas of the book, right, is that when we inspire others, we make the world a better place to be. And so I kind of call it spreading the seeds of inspiration. And so I hope that this book, people will read it and they're going to learn ways that they can be a more inspiring person to others in the world and make their lives better, which means it's going to lead those people to make other people's lives better, et cetera, et cetera. And so hopefully this book's my heart and soul, but hopefully it becomes the world's heart and soul too.
That was beautiful. You talk about three characteristics of truly inspiring leaders: visionaries, exemplars, and mentors. Can you just run through all three for us?
Yeah, and it might be really helpful if I just also do it with an example the way that I open the book, because I think it's really powerful. And I'll just mention really briefly. So, to take a step back, how did I discover these three core universal aspects of inspiring others? Is, I've been asking tens of thousands of people across the world, just tell me about a leader that inspired them. And eventually I started also asking them, tell me about a leader that infuriated them. And I discovered these sort of three critical insights. The first is the inspiring leader and the infuriating leader are kind of like on a continuum, an enduring continuum, optimist versus pessimist, courageous versus cowardly, selfish, generous versus selfish. And the second thing is that there's not a single characteristic that's mentioned in one country that's not mentioned in every country. So they're truly universal. And then third is that they really comprise these three factors. And the reason why they comprise these three factors is because they each satisfy a fundamental human need. So visionary is sort of how we see and communicate the world, provides people meaning and understanding. Exemplar, how we are in the world, provides people with a sense of protection and energy, and how we interact with other people in the world, mentor, that provides people with a sense of belonging and status. And so let me give you this example to open the book. Southwest Airlines 1380 It's flying from LaGuardia to Dallas when the left engine explodes and tears a hole in the side of the plane. Now, one of the passengers got sucked into that hole and was fatally injured. And now there's a massive crisis, right? There's depressurization, hydraulic lines are cut, fuel lines are cut. The plane needs to descend. So the pilot, Tammy Jo Schultz, she starts to descend it. And it's at this point where she starts down the inspiring path. She recognizes immediately that for the people in the back of the plane, when there's a hole in your plane and it's going down, it went down 20,000 feet in 5 minutes. As she said, the plane wanted to descend, so she let it descend 20,000 feet in 5 minutes. But she recognized for someone in the back of the plane, they think they're dying. They think they're falling. They think they're crashing. So she got on the intercom and she said 10 words. And those 10 words were, "We are not going down. We're going to Philly." And everyone said like that prevented heart attacks, right? That prevented anxiety, that prevented despair, that prevented hopelessness. It created a sense of possibility. And what she was doing there, and this is why she was so visionary, is she was giving them an optimistic why for their experience. She was giving them a sense of understanding why they were descending. It wasn't a fall, it was controlled, right? And so that really captures it. The second thing, if you hear the air traffic control, her conversation with them, it sounds like she's ordering soup at a deli. Like she's so calm. She's like, we have a hole in the plane. We're descending. We're looking to go to Philly. It's very matter of fact. And actually, when the EMTs evaluated her in the cockpit, one of them asked her a surprising question. They said, "How did you get through security?" She said, what are you talking about? She's like, "How did your nerves of steel not set off all the alarms, when you went the metal detectors?" Because she was so physiologically calm. And then the third thing, she was a mentor. Before she left the plane, she went row by row and looked every passenger in the eye and talked to them. She told a little girl how special she was, and how she never had the oxygen mask fall down, and that what a unique experience it was for her. So she was visionary, giving people that optimistic why. She was an exemplar. She was calm, and she allowed everyone else to be calm. And then she was a mentor. She made sure that everyone was taken care of.
I mean, what a rarity, though. I mean, if you did a whole, I'm going all Abraham Maslow on you right now, because he's like, self-actualization is important, but only 0.01% of the population. So how many percentage of the population actually have all of leaders have all three of those characteristics? Have you ever done a...
That's a great question. So, I've created a self-assessment scale about that. And I'll say two things about it I think are really, really important and really, really fundamental to the book. And I think why it matters so much. The first is this. My book answers the question whether leaders are born or made. And that's a kind of a subtle ingredient of your question, which is who has this and who doesn't. And what I'll say is, yes, of course, some people are going to be born with greater physiological calmness, right? Some people are going to be naturally able to see the big picture, a little bit. But because what I've done in my research is I've identified a universal set of characteristics. These are essentially behaviors. And that means that every single person can identify those behaviors. They can practice those behaviors. They can nurture them. They can develop them. But we are never fully inspiring all the time. Every single one of us, what I like to say is life slants us towards the infuriating end of the continuum. And so we fall down because we're hungry, because we're tired, because we're under pressure, because we're in a new situation, because we're mad at our partner. Whatever reason, we fall down. And so in some ways, it's a constant practice of being inspiring. And so one of the things I tell people is, and I've shown this in my research, is shame is a destructive emotion. When we feel shame, we want to hide or we become a defensive monster. So I say, look, when you're infuriating,
defensive monster.
Yeah,
that's funny. That's funny.
When you're infuriating, hold yourself accountable, but don't beat yourself up. Right? Move on. How are you going to be more inspiring next time? And I think that's right. So it's a constant thing. Now we can develop habits that allow us to be more inspiring more of the time. And it's funny. I love your book, Rise Above. I think it's so fantastic. And, I had this epiphany. I was looking through it again last night, preparing for a conversation. And I had this epiphany, which is that you and I are actually talking almost about the same thing, but just from a different lens. Like you're talking about what people can do to, in some ways, self-regulate themselves, to inspire themselves, to empower themselves, like as you talk about.
Yes.
And I'm talking about how we can inspire others, empower others. Now, there's a link between ours, right? Which is in your last chapter, you point out when we empower ourselves, it gives us the ability to empower others. And so that's your book is kind of like a stepping stone towards inspiring other people, maybe the critical first step in the process.
Yeah, great point. And great observation. And I agree with that. You mentioned how these things can ebb and flow, and even the most inspiring people have their moments, right? So let's take you for a second. Tell me about a time you were really sleep deprived and you were a little bit edgy there with your 7-year-old son, making him feel rejected. Can you talk a little bit about that story?
It's a great example. So one of the things I talk about in the book is I've coined a phrase called the leader amplification effect. And the leader amplification effect is essentially that when we're a leader, people are paying really close attention to our behavior, and everything we do, positive, negative, but also verbal and nonverbal, get amplified. And because of that, they have a bigger impact and intensify people's reactions, right? So amplified impact, intensified reactions. A corollary of this is the parent amplification effect, right? What we do is I can think of some of the infuriating things my parents did to me when I was a kid, but one thing, maybe the greatest joy of my life, I'll put it out there as one of the greatest joys of my life, is that since my son's been very, very small, he is now 8, he crawls in the bed and will just drape his body on mine and fall back to sleep. And I just lie there with him, snuggled as tightly as can be. Well, what happened was one morning when I was writing this book, I stayed up to 2:00 in the morning, and he'd come into my bedroom much earlier than normal, like 6 a.m. or 5:30. And I just couldn't go back to sleep. So I got out of bed and went to go sleep on the couch. Now, he interpreted my getting out of the couch is a total rejection of him. Now, I didn't realize it, but 2 days later, I noticed he crawled into bed, but he would go to the bottom of the bed, where kind of a dog sleeps. And I was like, what's going on? I said, why don't you want to snuggle with me? And he said, because you don't want to snuggle with me. I was like, that's not true. And he said, yes, it is, Dad. And so I was like, what is he talking about? And then it was later that afternoon, I realized maybe he got upset when I left at 5:30 in the morning. So later that night, I said to him, hey, Asher, did I hurt your feelings the other day when I, got out of bed? And he said, yes. And I was like, is that why you think I don't want to snuggle with you? And he said, yes. And I said, well, what happened was I was really tired and I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And I would love if we could snuggle again tomorrow morning. And so we did, And so, but yeah, one of the key things about inspiring is self-awareness. And what that requires is, how does my behavior impact someone else? I had this incredible experience when I was a young assistant professor where I saw a doctoral student at 9 in the morning and I said, hey, Gail, come by my office later. I need to talk to you. I think I said, come by my office at 3 p.m. I need to talk to you. So 6 hours later, she shows up in my office and she's scared. She looks like a frightened doe, and I'm like, I just want to go over some research materials. And so I told her what I wanted, and she was she slammed her fist on the table and said, never do that to me again. I'm like, oh my God, do what? She's like, never tell me you need to talk with me without telling me why. You know how much work I got done in the last 6 hours? 0. Is Adam mad at me? Someone else mad at me? Am I going to lose a resource? And so now at first I thought Gail's neurotic, and she is a little neurotic. But later, the next day, my chair of my department asked me to come by their office, and I freaked out, and so I realized it's really about self-awareness. I had to recognize I'm in a position of power. Asking someone to talk to me is inherently fear-inducing, and what I need to do is tell them why. So, and it was crazy if I'd said to Gail, hey, Gail, come by my office at 3 p.m. Let's go over your research materials, versus come by my office at 3 p.m. I need to talk to you. Same number of words. It didn't want to change anything. Someone else told me a story recently, their boss sent them an email on a Thursday. Hey, come by my office at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I need to talk to you. She didn't sleep for 5 days. She goes by the boss's office at 2 p.m. She's like, I just want to go over the agenda for Friday's meeting. She's like, I didn't sleep for 5 days. And so part of it is awareness of the impact that we're having on other people. That, I think, is one of the biggest keys. Once we become aware of that, we can harness it for good.
Yeah, those are really great examples. Is it possible to have these characteristics and to show that awareness for members of your in-group, but be really divisive to your out-group? Like, I mean, I'm sure you've struggled with, like, is Trump a good leader? In some ways, he's kind of a good leader for his people, but not for all people.
Yeah. I mean, I think, let me say three things about Trump. The first thing is that on these three dimensions, how we communicate about the world, how we present ourselves in the world, and how we interact in the world, at one level, Trump's inspiring on all three. So Make America Great Again is optimistic. It's simple. It's a mantra. It's a guiding light. He presents himself as a creative genius, as a strong and powerful protector of people. And there's one thing, one of the core, so the three core elements of being kind of like an exemplar of desired behavior is being courageous, it's being strong and powerful, and it's also being authentically passionate. And creative, and he's authentically passionate. Even his biggest detractors would say he's authentically passionate.
Yes.
And then third, he's a mentor in this sense. He's talking to people who feel forgotten and not included in current America and says, you still matter, right? The forgotten people in the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, right? Those areas that really, Pennsylvania, that really turned the tide of the election. Now, he's very infuriating on other dimensions, right? Because his Make America Great Again is only for a subset of the population, so it's non-inclusive. He's very impulsive, right? So he makes very strong decisions based on whatever he's currently experiencing. And from a day-to-day level, he's one of the worst mentors in the sense of, like, he throws everyone under the bus. When things go well, it's me, 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 me. When things don't go, I mean, he constantly says, I hardly knew a person, that he's known for 10 years, like, as if, like, what are you talking about? It's their fault. I don't know this person, and so he's a complicated one. And you hit the nail on the head, which is that he's like a messiah and inspiration to the people within the in-group because he's satisfying all three of their needs. But he's such a pariah for the out-group because he's infuriating in all three of those dimensions.
Yeah. I don't know.
The messiah and the pariah at the same time.
I kind of want to reserve. Yeah, no, absolutely. I kind of, there's a part of me that wants to reserve the phrase inspiring leader to those who don't have that split. Like, I mean, like, Hitler was obviously an inspiring leader, but I don't really feel comfortable calling him an inspiring leader. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I think history changes, right? So I think history is going to look differently at Trump than some of the way that people currently do, right? And,
I should be clear, Hitler was an inspiring leader to the Germans, but not too much to the Jews.
Yes, no. And to probably only a subset
and
of
the rest of the world.
Too, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
So there's something I want to reserve. I feel like there's a moral component here that is not explicit in your three things, but I kind of want to be.
I think, let me just say, I think the single biggest, so, I've actually, in my class, I've shown a picture of, like, Martin Luther King with his arm raised and Hitler with his arm raised, and they're in the same posture, right? Mm-hmm. And the question is, why do we see these people so differently? And I do think it really comes down to the vision and who it's reserved for. And I think that's exactly what you said. It was reserved for Germans and, not for Jews. And Trump, it's reserved for some, for the red states, not the blue states. I mean, even the current budget is designed to punish blue states, right? It's like, and I don't think we find in the long run people who are, punishing, demonizing, separating, dividing people as, in the long run, very inspiring people, even if they might be current in the short run for a subset of people.
Yeah. We're on the same page on this one. Yeah. Wonderful.
Well, kindred spirits, you and I, Scott.
Say it again.
Kindred spirits, right? Yes. We're on the same page.
Indeed, indeed. You coin a lot of phrases in this book, but I don't think you just did it for this book. You've had a long career where you've used these things. So here's another phrase you throw out there: inspiring, infuriating continuum.
Yep.
I've never like seen that continuum before. So can you kind of talk to people about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think what happened was so I'll tell you this, how it all started, right? So I was teaching the FBI after 9/11. I was at Northwestern University, Kellogg School of Management. So one day, an FBI agent just started talking about a leader that inspired him. And I was so struck by how much his entire persona transformed, right? His eyes lit up. He stood up in his chair. His arms were animated. And like, he just seemed to be like this spirit of inspiration seemed to was wellspring of hope and possibility just seemed to flow through him. So I actually stopped, and I still remember when this happened. And I just asked everyone else in the class, could they tell me about a leader that inspired them? And everyone could. And so from that day on, I started asking everyone all over the world, tell me about a leader that inspired them. Now, a year later, I was teaching FBI again. And one of the agents said, I don't want to talk about a guy that inspired me. I want to tell you about this guy that just pissed me off. He made my blood boil. He infuriated me. And so then all of a sudden, I started asking them, well, tell me about a leader that infuriated you. And I realized they're all on a continuum, right? So courageous versus cowardly, calm versus anxious, optimistic versus pessimistic, right? Generous versus selfish, sharing credit versus stealing credit, micromanaging, versus involving other people. And so I started realizing they were essentially mirror images of each other. And so I realized that this continuum, I think, really matters because I think it's like embedded in the architecture of the human brain. We're kind of designed to process people along these dimensions because they matter so much for fulfilling our fundamental human needs.
Hi all, I want to take a moment to make a few important announcements that I'm really excited about. As you all know, I'm committed to helping people self-actualize. In the service of that, I just had a new book come out called Rise Above, Overcome a Victim Mindset, Empower Yourself, and Realize Your Full Potential. In this book, I offer a science-backed toolkit to help you overcome your limiting beliefs and take control of your life. Are you tired of feeling helpless? This book will offer you hope, not by identifying with the worst things that have happened to you, but by empowering you to tap into the best that is within you. Rise Above is available wherever you get your books. Are you a personal coach looking to take your coaching to the next level? I'm also excited to tell you that our Foundations of Self-Actualization Coaching 3-day immersive experience for coaches is back by popular demand. Foundations of Self-Actualization Coaching is a course offered to enhance your coaching practice by offering you evidence-based tools and insights to equip you to more effectively help your clients unlock their unique creative potential. You can learn more about the course and register by going to centerforhumanpotential.com/SAC. That's centerforhumanpotential.com/SAC. Okay, now back to the show. Well, you talk about language. I love that. Yeah. Can you just tell me what needs in particular you're thinking of? Safety, connection.
Yeah. So visionary satisfies this. We have this fundamental need for like meaning and understanding. So like Tammy Jo Schultz, like what's going on? Why are we dropping? Right? She provided a sense of understanding, but like, I talk about this in the book, but the data are very clear, and I can attest to this, that like when you have kids, your life gets worse. You sleep less well, you eat less well, you rarely shower, you barely have sex, right? Your house is a mess, your mind's a mess, your body's a mess, right? But people talk about this psychological experience of meaning. My life has a sense of purpose. And so regardless of whether you have kids or not, it's not dependent on kids, but we are biologically conditioned to crave meaning, right? Nietzsche has this great quote, right? A person who has a why to live can bear almost any how, right? They can suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune if they know why they're doing something. And I think that's really, really, really important, which is that's what Trump does to his supporters, right? He gives them that meaning and understanding what's going on in their world and how they can be that. Now, we also want to feel safe and protected, right? And that's why the exemplar is so important, but we also want to feel energized. That's why passion matters so much, and then the third set of meanings. So the first set is like meaning understanding for vision. Then it's like what I call like protection and passion for exemplar. And then the third is these really two fundamental human needs, because we're social beings, a sense of belonging and a sense of status, right? That I'm included, but I'm also valued and respected, right? That I matter. And so I think that's why these are the three universal dimensions.
Wait. It's so interesting because I've never, like in Maslow's hierarchy and in mine, I guess we would put status under the esteem needs.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. Okay. I was trying to think like where would I put?
Yeah. It's definitely under esteem. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that you could look at like Trump supporters, right? They were losing status and they were losing security. And so what he was able to do was really satisfy their security needs. I'm going to protect you and take care of you. And you are the most important people in this world, And so I think those are really what's going on with that. I want to go back to the inspiring fearing continuum, because I think that one of the things that makes the continuum so important is it's not just philosophically or theoretically or conceptually interesting. It's also practically important, because if we fall to the infuriating side, we actually have a path to the other side, right? We can, like if I'm stealing credit, I can start sharing credit, right? If I'm micromanaging, I can start giving responsibility. So it actually gives us, the counterweighting toolkit to get off of the infuriating mat and to stand up onto the inspiring side.
Yeah. I mean, can anyone learn these skills? Like,
Absolutely.
And these things are so important. And tell me more. How can someone, how can a human like become more visionary if just by sheer will?
Yeah. So 3 things I'll say about it. And you probably notice I love to say 3 things about everything. But the first is, in the book, I talk about how for each one of these, there's a kind of reflection task that we can engage in that helps us. So to become more visionary, one of the most important things we need to do is really tap into our values. And so there's so much research that's shown that when we tap into our values, we can see the big picture. We become more optimistic. It's motivating. And I just published a paper a couple of years ago in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where we worked with a Swiss employment agency. I had a postdoc from Switzerland. So that was our in. And in Switzerland, when you become unemployed, which is one of the 5 biggest stressors anyone can experience in their life, and I was fired from my first post-college job after I graduated Harvard. I got fired from my first job, so I know how painful that experience is. And when people go in to get their employment benefits, they have to register in person. And for half of the people coming in, we gave them a values reflection task. We said, think about your values, put them in a hierarchy, like we're, the most important one. Why do they matter to you? But I think this is a key part of our manipulation. How have you demonstrated your values recently? 2 months later, the people who randomly assigned to reflect on their values were twice as likely to have a job. And the effect was so strong, we had to stop our study and give everybody the values intervention. And, not only did we make those people's lives better by getting them jobs and the people's lives around them, we also saved the Swiss government a bunch of money too, because they had to stop paying. If someone gets a job, you no longer pay unemployment benefits. And so there's real value. Now that's how we get into a visionary state of mind. Now to get into an exemplar state of mind, there's 2 things that we can do. One of them I've published hundreds of studies on, and thousands of studies probably around the world on this, is that thinking about a time when you had power. And so we, have done this in people before negotiations, before interviews, and we can show before speeches. So, one study that I didn't do that was done actually in Europe by some researchers is before giving a speech in front of an audience, very scary, they had some people reflect on a time in which they had power. Some people reflect on a time when they lacked power. They measured their physiological arousal, and then they gave their speeches. And what they showed in this research is the people who thought about time when they had power were physiologically calmer and gave better speeches, right? I've shown that in interviews that people who do this power prime before an interview are more likely to get admission to a school, for example. And so it's really a powerful way to do that. Yeah.
Wow. Is this more replicable than the power pose?
It's much more replicable than the power pose. And, here's what I'll say about this. There's something called the P curve analysis.
I love Amy though.
I love Amy too.
As a human.
I hired Amy at Kellogg. I was literally on the search committee, and I was chair of the search committee, and Amy didn't apply for the job. And the day before a search committee meeting, I thought of her, and she was at Rutgers Psych, and I brought her CV to the thing, and we hired her. And look, I think the power pose is really important, but research shows that the power pose on outcomes like interviews or negotiations or stuff shows what's called a flat line. So it doesn't look like there's a real effect there. Whereas the power prime shows like what's called the curve line, which shows like there's a real effect there. Now, I do think though, and this is what I'll say to people, is to get yourself, and I think you would really resonate with, given everything you talk about in your book, is that you got to pick the thing that works for you. Right. For some people, it's going to be a power pose. For some people, it's going to be thinking about, time in their power. Ted Lasso says barbecue sauce right before he throws his darts. Kevin Costner when Tin Cup says dollar bills before he swings the golf club. Like sometimes it's the mantra that helps you. It's something that allows you to do that. Now, the second thing that we can do to become a more inspiring exemplar in our presence is to really think about our passion and what we're really passionate about, and to communicate about our passions. And I've shown this in my research. Like when you ask someone to talk about their passion, their eyes light up, they smile, big beaming smile, they talk faster, they use their hands more, right? And they lean in. So think about that. When you're talking about your passion, right? It's in your eyes, it's in your mouth, it's in your throat, it's in your hands, it's in your body. Right? Now, when I ask people what happened to you, they're like, my eyes lit up. I smiled. Like I could feel that passion percolating in me. And the second thing I think is so important about that, reflecting on your passion and sharing it, is that you can't fake it.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're trying to fake passion, like, okay, I got to make my eyes big. Now I got to smile. You can't, those things happen spontaneously and simultaneously.
But
when it's authentic.
Wait, can we zoom in on that for a second? Yeah. Because I've been thinking lately that passion probably doesn't belong in the emotions domain of psychology. It's been miscategorized. I feel like it should be categorized as a cognitive mindset, because if you just treat it as like an emotional situation, it's of course going to wane very quickly.
Yeah.
Especially like with love, your passion for someone, you don't always feel passion for your partner. So anyway, no, your point is very well taken. I've just been thinking about the whole construct of passion lately.
I think what you're saying is an incredibly important point. And I do think that, passion is also linked to our values and that sense of meaning and understanding too. And I think that's what really is really important. And I think that's why we infuse our vision with our passion. That makes it even more powerful. And so I think that's exactly right. And then just how do we get into like a mentor state of mind? Well, this is what I've studied the longest thing in my career, since 1995. This is, I started working on my dissertation, is perspective taking. Right. And really taking other people's perspectives. And like, just to give you one example of a study that, I've shown that perspective taking helps you get better outcomes in negotiations. But in one study we did is we took every third-year medical student or fourth-year medical student at Howard University and American University, George Washington University and Howard University. And they had to do interactions with patients. And the patients rated them on like a 17 measure of like how satisfied they were, how informed they felt, how much they trusted the doctor, right? And before they went into their patient interviews that morning, we had the dean give half the people a manipulation because people were separated in different rooms because they couldn't all fit. And so for one of them, he said, when you go in and meet your patients, really try to take their perspective. Try to think about what it's like to be on that side of the table, and to help you practice. Think about time when you took someone's perspective. We're going to give you 5 minutes to do that. The other people, no intervention. When we look at the patient satisfaction ratings, the people who had a perspective taking doctor, and here's the key thing, the people didn't know about the manipulation. Like the patients knew nothing about it. Same thing back when I talked about power and those interviews and the speeches. People interviewing the people didn't know that there had been a manipulation, right? So the receivers are blind, but the patients rated their perspective-taking doctors. They felt more satisfied, more informed. And here's, I think, one of the things that I found most valuable is they trusted the doctors more. And why does that matter? Because trust is one of the best predictors of actually complying with your treatment regimen. If you trust your doctor, you're going to follow their advice. And then you're going to get better.
What's the correlation there?
It was experimental manipulation. So I didn't look at it. What's the
effect size then?
I'd have to go back. We published a paper in 2010, so that was 15 years ago. So I don't remember. It was probably the effect size probably wasn't very large. But what I'll say to you is that, if you go back to Rosno and Rosenthal's, binomial effect size display, right? Even a tiny effect, if it moves people from the failure to success condition, is a huge impact, right?
Yeah. No. It's clearly very important work. I'm just curious, just how much
trust it's a great question.
Does have an effect, because it's not something that doctors are trained. It's not part of the training program. And why not? Yeah.
But I want to say one thing about this. We talked about who's inspiring, who's infuriating. I think, as a doctor, if you wake up and you're kind of on the grumpy side of you wake up at, you think your first appointment's at 9, but it's really 10. And so you wake up earlier than you wanted to, which I know happens sometimes to people. And then you're a little grumpy. I think if you just take a step back and say, okay, I got to take the perspective of my patients, you're going to be a more inspiring doctor that day than if you fail to engage in that reflection.
Yes. Well, this could apply to anything. Yeah. Not just doctors.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Teachers,
Well, we're a little bit all over the place, but I'm okay with that, because this is all.
It's all going towards one final point.
It's all.
It's like the end of Loki, the first season. It all goes to that.
Teleos.
That point.
There's a teleos to this conversation.
Exactly.
So I want to call back something you talked about a little bit earlier. We just so briefly touched on the word status and esteem, but I think it's such an important one, because you talk about expanding the status pie.
That's another phrase I love. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. No, I mean, your book is full of Adam Galinsky originals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Expanded status pie, I kind of coined this phrase, but it's because I've been teaching negotiations for 25 years, and we talk about expanding the pie, the negotiating pie. And then one day I realized most people think about and the big problem in negotiations is most people think about the pie as fixed, but it's actually oftentimes expandable. And I had this epiphany. It was literally just like 4 years ago. It was sometime in the, some recent past that most people think about status as fixed. If I give you credit, I lose credit. Right. Yeah. But then I realized that, the status pie is expandable. If I give you credit, you gain in status, but so do I, because people really like the person that shares credit, now it doesn't mean it works in every possible situation. Sometimes we got to own our own, contributions. But the idea is that when you can recognize other people, that fills them with an empowering sense of respect, but people also see you as a good guy, as a good person, right? As the right type of person, the person they would want to lead them. And so, sharing credit is actually, to use another negotiation term, Pareto optimal, right? It's going to make the world a better place.
Well, that's really interesting, because, of course, about the two dimensions, warmth and competent. Can you be a certain kind of inspiring leader where you demonstrate both? I mean, I think of that every time someone tells me about the worth dimensions, I think about that meme. Why not both? With the girl, saying why not both? So, tell me your thoughts about connecting this to those continuums.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned this in the book, but, I really like, this might be another, Galinskyism, but like I say, you want to be superhuman, not human super. And what I mean by that is that like, there's so many evident, like Linda Rottenberg, who's CEO of a company called Endeavor, she's this incredible leader, but she says she didn't really become an inspiring leader until she started talking about her human side. In this case, it was her husband's battle with cancer. But I always tell people, like, if she exposed her vulnerability at the beginning, no one would have taken her serious as a leader. It's like, Hillary Clinton cries and it transforms her into a human. Elizabeth Dole cries at the beginning of her campaign and she's done, right? And so you want to establish your competence first. And once you establish your competence, it allows you to be generous. And I'll just say, like, I honestly think the one thing that I most enjoy about having status in the world is it gives me the opportunity to be generous to other people, right? And I love being generous. In fact, I have a values card. It's in my wallet right here. And my number one value is generosity. Like, that's what I believe is the most important thing.
Okay, virtue signaler.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that, we can expand the status pie. And I'll give you one example that I love. I got invited to speak before the top 100 executives at Fox and Rupert Murdoch, and along with a guy named Sir David Brailsford. And Sir Dave Brailsford was knighted by the Queen because he took British cycling from a doormat to the top of the Olympic mountain. They hadn't won a gold medal, I think, in 100 years. And then suddenly within, 6 years, he's taken them to, the most medals at the Olympics. And then he conquered the Tour de France. He created a brand new team called Team Sky, and they won 5 of 6 Tour de France's. How did they do this? Well, this is what he said. And I thought this was one of the most important things I've ever heard. He said, cycling is a team sport. We are a team. But there's an inherent problem. One person gets all the glory, right? It's, the Lance Armstrong, right? The person who everyone sees, that the top writer, right? But everyone's working to help that person. He said, so I have a job to do as a leader, which is to acknowledge the contributions that each person made that day to the team success, which of course, one person's getting most of the credit. So I'm like, Scott, he wouldn't have won this, leg today if you hadn't chased that breakaway down, and Mike, if you hadn't, taken the lead and drafted, like he would have been too tired to make that climb up the hill. And, Bob over here, it was so great that you were able to keep everyone, on that curve, whatever it was. And he said, every single day I'm thinking about what did each person do that was really helpful and acknowledging them. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do as a leader is to recognize when people feel seen, it's transformative. I mean, everybody wants to be seen. Everyone wants to be recognized.
It's true.
I've been teaching. I teach for a group of high potential women in the wine and spirits industry, and one of them gave me a handwritten card recently, and it was I think the most, like, I've never felt more seen in my life. She said, the child in me, was moved by your visual language. The actor in me was moved by your practical tips. The human in me was moved by the way you created so much interaction among the classmates, and the scientist in me was moved by your research findings. And if you'd ask me, what do I want to do as a teacher? I would say, I want to take scientifically validated ideas, present them in an engaging way, while people get to interact with each other and learn from each other, and then give them ways to demonstrate that practically in their own lives. And she recognized all 4 of those things. And I've never felt more seen. I mean, leaders, want to be seen, right? So when I praised my dean recently when someone asked me, like, who's the most, inspiring person in my life right now? And I said, my dean. And part of it is because he's strategically brilliant. He is deep humanity and empathy others, but he also listens to feedback. And I can go to him, I can say, you could do this one thing better. And he's like, you're right. But then I sent my dean, the article when it came out with me talking about him. I was like, I just want you to know, like you inspire me.
Oh, this is such a sweet conversation.
You talked about passion before, and I really, and I mentioned earlier on, this book is my heart and soul. Like I think you can see my infectious, youthful, authentic passion. I love this material. I really think it makes the world a better place. Oh, absolutely.
Do you think inspiration's infectious?
I do. And I think it's reciprocal. And so I don't have this in the book. I created this after the book, another Galinskyism. I call it reap what you sow. And reap comes from the Bible, which is that like the energy we put out, the energy we get back. You put out inspiration, you get inspiration back. But my reap is REIP because it's an acronym for reflect on your experience, emulate inspiring leaders in your life, form an intention to be more inspiring, and then practice it. REIP.
You're good, you.
Yes.
You're good, you.
And and so let me just give you, I don't know how much time we have left, but I think this is one of the great practical tips that I could give people, which is how, and this is, I think, gets back this idea about like expanding the inspiring pie, right? The inspiring energy in the world. But getting back to that reap. So I talk about a guy named Joseph Stigliano in my book. He's president of a bank. He's got 1,200 employees, and he sends a birthday note to every one of his employees. Now, he's got to be pretty organized to do this, right? And he showed me the note. The note is one line, and he does about 5 of these a day over his cup of coffee. And line might be like, hey, Scott, happy birthday. How was, bowling? This person went bowling. And then, the person right back's a novel like, oh my God, bowling was amazing, blah, 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 or bowling was tough this weekend, whatever it was. So I've shared that story, around the world. And then I got a call from a CEO and he said, I got to tell you, I adapted what Joseph Stigliano did. Every morning over my cup of coffee, I send out either a compliment or an expression of gratitude to someone in my orbit. And I might say, hey, Scott, I was just thinking about just what a great conversation you led last week on your podcast. Or it might be, hey, I couldn't have gotten that idea out without, your help. Thanks so much for, assisting me. And he said 3 things to me that I think were really interesting. The first thing he said was, when you give someone a compliment in person, they get embarrassed. They're like, oh, He said, but when you give it over writing, they get to savor it. They get to share it. And they feel more comfortable responding, with a lot of enthusiasm back to you, right? And whereas in person, I think it gets muted, And he said, the second thing he said is, I did this to put a skip in their step. But I got these incredible responses back. Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm finally going to take, my spouse out to that incredible restaurant they wanted to go to because of your compliment today. I feel so, I'm on top of the world. He said it put a skip in his step, knowing that he'd put a skip in their step, because of their responses back. So he said, so by sending it by text, someone told me I read your text 5 times over the weekend. Right? They got to savor it, I shared it with my spouse, my mom, and then, they also you get this expression back. So if I was going to say anything to your listeners, your incredible listeners out there, I would say at least once a day, go out of your way to try to compliment someone or express gratitude towards someone. And if you make that a daily habit, the CEO does it over his cup of coffee. Joseph Stigliano does it over his cup of coffee, right? If we build it in a practice that, we don't have to think about it. It happens automatically. You're going to make their world better. You're going to make your world better. And you're going to spread the seeds of inspiration.
I really like that. That's very consistent with positive psychology as well.
Yeah.
I really like that. Do you teach positive psychology at all in any of your classes?
A little bit. I certainly teach about the role of optimism as a leader, right? And how important it is to help people see, I love this line from George W. Bush's 2000 convention speech, which is the last paragraph. It says, Americans live on the sunrise side of the mountain. And just that idea, right, that we're on the dawn of a better tomorrow.
Love it. I love it. Well, along these lines, a lot of people are talking about DEI and all that, and people on the right like bashing it. And putting all that aside, I think we all can agree that fairness is important. You know, like no matter what your political views are, I hope we all can agree that fairness is important. And so I really appreciate that you use that word in your book to kind of try to sidestep a lot of this. And so how can you inspire fairness in organizations?
It's funny, right? Because I very purposely use the word inspiring fairness rather than inspiring equity to get away from.
That's what I'm saying. I see you. I see you, buddy. I assume you did that intentionally.
Yes, I did. And I'll just say, the one Achilles heel, like I'm the vice dean of DEI. I've been the vice dean of DEI.
You're the vice dean of DEI
at Columbia Business School.
Wow,
for the last 3 years.
I had no idea.
And so, like, obviously, I'm a strong proponent of having a diverse, inclusive, and fair place. But diversity's one Achilles heel is that when you create preferential pathways for some groups, the groups that aren't on those pathways are going to feel it's unfair, right? And so I think Trump tapped into a justifiable sense of resentment, right? That people experienced, white resentment. And so I do think that, I think it tells us a larger story that if we're unfair today, people are going to want compensation tomorrow, but the people tomorrow who aren't being compensated are going to think it's unfair. So if we're unfair today, we just create cycles of unfairness for the future, right? And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be as fair as possible. And I think that's where we start with values. You articulate the values and the system, and if everyone understands it, then it's fair. I tell a story in the book about how when I was at Northwestern, we used to fight about hiring every single year. And we would argue about the rules, and everyone was trying to manipulate the rules to try to fit their preferred candidate. And I this is the honest truth. Like, I think the only time in my life I've actually felt homicidal was during these faculty meetings, like where people were manipulating. And then someone had a great idea. They're like, let's meet in the summer when we don't have any candidates on the table and come up with the rules that we're going to use. And we're going to write them down. We're going to create a constitution, and these are going to be the rules. And after that, I won a lot of times, but I also lost sometimes. And when I lost, I was sad, but not angry, right? Because the rules were fair. We'd set them up in advance. So I think that's a really important thing, is to think very carefully at the very beginning of what's going to be a fair procedure. Because if you start off with unfairness, you're just creating an infuriating cycle.
Wait. This is so important. This is so important. I don't want to gloss over this. So fairness for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think being minded about that, I really appreciate the way you're thinking about this. I really do.
What we want, and I think everyone agreed to this, is we want fairness and opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. And so if everyone has fair opportunity, and we want to eliminate bias, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and there's some ways we can do this, right? Like, this is probably the greatest example. In fact, the person who did this research won the Nobel Prize in economics.
Wow.
The best way to create gender diversity in symphony orchestras, blind auditions.
Yeah.
Right? That's not giving anyone an advantage, right? It's not giving women an advantage because they've been unfairly treated in the past. It's that women were being unfairly treated because people saw they were a woman and then judged them differently.
Yeah.
My favorite part of the story is that they realized they had to either put down carpet or have people take off their shoes, because you'd hear the click, click, click of heels and know it was a woman. And so obviously putting down carpet, some people don't like to take off their shoes, but the idea of like, you had to eliminate different footwear from hearing the different footwear. But that's a good example of that, right? Another example would be like, look, we know the SATs are one of the single most important things for getting people into schools. Some people are hiring tutors, right, and working really hard, and they have money to do that. But are there other ways that we can help people get the same type of tutoring, right? Create opportunities even within schools, right? So that we're giving everyone the opportunity to be better and do better.
I love it. I have a section in my new book called Empower DEI. And I mean, that's really what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It should be inspiring to people to feel as though they belong, and to feel as not just that they belong, but that they're valued. Yeah. I mean, you were talking earlier about the importance of being seen. There's something very inspiring about feeling like you're seen for, not just your belonging, but also for your positive contribution you can make to the group. I don't see them as exactly the same thing, but they're both important,
Yeah, and I think, I'll tell a story about this is a former student of mine, a black man. He told me this great story in class. He told it in class, and but we had a huge discussion around it. Like he got hired right out of college, and he was in a band. He was a drummer in a band. He loved playing in this band, but he was so worried that his colleagues would look down on him for being in a band. So his colleagues would say to him, "What are you doing this weekend?" And he would deflect because he didn't want to reveal the truth. And so everyone's like, this guy's kind of weird, And then, one day he finally opened up to one of his friends and said, "Oh, I'm in this band." He's like, "Oh, I'd love to come see you play." And then he did. And then the friend told other people that he had seen it. And then he played a show, and there were like 20 people from the firm there. And, he ended up getting, sponsored, which is a big deal in a consulting company where you get sponsored, and now you are, you don't have to pay for business school, which is, hundreds of thousands of dollars these days. And one of the partners said to him, he's like, "If you hadn't shared that life aspect of you, we never would have sponsored you because we didn't know you."
Yeah.
And everyone was better off because he shared who he was. Like he was better off because he got to be more authentic. He was also better off because he was more valued by other people. They were better off because they felt more connected to him and like felt he was a better, more important part of the team. And so I think there's also a sense of like with DEI of helping people be more authentic. I just published a paper in Organization Science showing that in organizations that have really preach bringing your full self to work, it actually is a DEI positive effect, meaning that like Black individuals feel more comfortable bringing their full self to work. And what I love about that, that's an inclusive policy, a fair policy. It's not saying women should bring themselves to work or underrepresented minority. Everyone should bring themselves to work, and that includes people who are underrepresented.
I love that research. Can you please send it to me? There's someone a colleague of mine, she's really into this, and I would love to send her that paper. Yeah. Just to end, is there would be the absolute tippy top message you'd want to give people from this book? If someone said you could only give me one message about this book,
it's interesting. I would say two things. I would say, I want to say three things. I want to tie it also back to your book too. The first thing I would say is that each and every one of us can be more inspiring. We can do it by engaging in the right reflections, right? The right emulations, creating the right intentions, and practicing, right? That REIP, the REAP. But the second thing is that when we're more inspiring, we are creating a better world. And it's especially true when we're a leader because of the leader amplification effect. We have a responsibility, duty to be inspiring because otherwise we're going to spread fires of infuriation. And I think, your last chapter of your book talks about like, when you empower yourself, you can empower others. But I also think that when we inspire others, we also inspire ourselves. So I told the story of the CEO that like, when he sent out his compliments and gratitude, he got wonderful things back. And then that inspired him to do that even more. So in some ways, we maybe we should write a paper, right? Empower yourself to empower others, but inspire others to inspire yourself, right? It's like this reciprocal coin.
I love it, Adam. It's a great integration of both of our passions. And although I am very, very passionate about that too, as well, what you do. And I wonder if there's some sort of acronym we can come up with.
Yeah, exactly.
That's catchier than that saying that whole. You're so good at coming up with.
I love acronyms. I'll just tell you one, trying to understand what is inequality, I came up with the road to inequality. It's differences in resources, opportunities, appraisals, and deference. And if you think about all of those, right, like people who are advantaged, they have more resources, more opportunities, are praised or evaluated more positively, and people defer to them. So it's the road to inequality.
Wow, that's so cool. And then just return to the EEII acronym. What does that stand for?
Oh, I was just like trying to make empower to empower, inspire to inspire.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I was just trying to come up with some.
But you did it.
Well,
okay. What do we call them? The Galinskyisms?
I guess so. Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. It was long overdue, but I can't wait to shine the spotlight on your amazing and really important work in the world today. So thank you.
I've probably done 50 podcasts, and I can honestly say that this was my favorite conversation so far.
What? Wow. Thank you, Adam. Thank you.
No, thank you.